What's up, y'all? Welcome back. Welcome back. Today, I'm here to talk about two books written by Ralph Ellison. Let's get it.
Favorite reader, that's who you are. Traveling near, traveling far. Through every chapter, you're the star. Favorite reader, that's who you are.
Okay, if you saw the thumbnail, you see the title, you already know the two books. That's Invisible Man, and then that's Juneteenth. Both written by Ralph Ellison. This is the only novel published by Ralph Ellison while he was alive. This one was a work in progress for 40 years. It was published posthumously. So, the only novel written by him while he was alive. This one published after his death. He has written other things, but I'm only talking about novels. Anyways, let's get into it. One thing I want to point out before I do like the individual book reviews, both of these books have a couple of things in common. Both deal with infiltration to some degree. Both deal with courage, liberation, freedom. Both deal heavily. I mean, if I had to pick out one singular theme for both of these books, there's plenty, but if I had to choose the most prominent one in both of them, that is Black manhood in America. I feel like that's the overall overarching theme. There are many, but if I had to say which one is reoccurring between these two and is the strongest, it is Black manhood in America. Everything that relates to that. Like I said, freedom, liberation, infiltration, being seen or invisible. Both deal with change. Both deal with the free mind. Both deal with deep thinking of the main characters, and even the people reading it. Like you have to draw some conclusions. You have to kind of connect some dots, see what Ellison is doing, and both of these really, yeah. Both deal with confrontation. Both heavily deal with confrontation. And also, they were both kind of ironic. They had some irony laced throughout it, which I thought was interesting. Another thing I want to talk about before I get into individual reviews is Ralph Ellison's writing style in general. So, first I read Invisible Man. This is my first time reading it. It's not a reread. I've never read it before June 2026. Then I read Juneteenth. What I can say about Ralph Ellison's writing, I can see how this book can be like spot on for some people and like a miss for other people. He has like an interesting writing style where I don't want to call it stream of conscious because that's not really how I would like describe it, but it was a lot going on at times, and it bobbed and weaved. It was in and out of stuff. And like in Juneteenth specifically, also in Invisible Man, but it seemed like a lot of stuff was it seemed on the surface that a lot of stuff was disconnected, and you had to see what this had to do with that and why this was being told and what was going on. And it almost, I could see how somebody would call this disjointed. And it did seem disconnected to me at times. But then I had to take a step back and I was like, maybe I just didn't understand what he was doing at this one part. Because collectively as a book, I understand where he was going. I think I understand where he was going with it. Kind of the same thing with Invisible Man. His writing style is interesting. I feel like, and I wasn't alive when he was writing these books, but I feel like Invisible Man, when it came out, probably was a polarizing book based on how it's written, based on kind of the themes that's in it, and what Ellison was probably trying to portray at that time. I could see this being polarizing. This one, I I feel like you just gotta buckle down and read these, and sometimes be like, well, where's he going with this? He's very much gonna pull out some SAT words, okay? And that's funny because I saw Discord online this week about um how writers should make their books more accessible by not using big words that people don't use in everyday language. And it's elitist and ableist to like throw big words out there. You might need a thesaurus and a dictionary going through these. And it's not over the top where it's like every page you looking up three different words and here and there. But he did, like the way that he put some of them sentences together, he was like, I wanna say like I wanted to be appreciative of how he puts up. Like sometimes it was beautiful, like the way it was written and put together. But other times I did kind of feel like this was a whole lot to get to this point. Anyways, here's a spoiler. I enjoyed both books. I did enjoy both books, but I can see how it could be one of those books where, not everybody would like it. Let me think. I would recommend these to anybody with the disclaimer that they may not like it, but I think they're both worth a try. And I could be wrong. Yeah, and I do think they're both worth a try. And another similarity. When I say he overdoes it at times with the sentences, I believe that's intentional for him to be like super overt and very like floral in his writing at times. But then there's also like a lot of subtlety in both of these where I feel like super simply stated things packed a lot of punch too. Like you really, like I said, you had to kind of try to guess where he was going with this scene he was painting or where he would like during his dialogue, what he was trying to portray during those times. So they both did that well. Also, what I can say, both of these books had very, very, very vivid characters. I could see the imagery. I could see what's going on. He described the scene so well. Maybe because he was going above and beyond at times, but also just even in how he set the scene, you could pretty much place yourself there. Okay, now let me get into the review. I'm gonna start with Invisible Man because this is the book that I read first. So the protagonist of this book is an unnamed narrator. He is an invisible man. And like I said, this is a book that's heavy, heavy, heavy in Black manhood in America. But you had this unnamed narrator who is, so in the first part of the book, he's starting out at a university. And then in the latter half of the book, he's in New York. He's at the university. He's playing this role of he's Black. Okay, he is Black. He's at a university and it's like an old plantation close by. He's driving for one of the founders of the university, okay? Some stuff go down. He get back to the university and he's in trouble for what took place. And this is very, very surface level right now. I'm gonna kind of jump into some of the things. Then he gets sent from the man in his college to New York City, and he thinks that he's going there to get a job. It's a punishment for what he did, but he thinks that his college career is not over. Come to find out, he got another thing coming. So it's a twist with that. So he's in New York and he's initially from the South, travels to the North. And you know the symbolism there where authors will write a character who travels from the South to the North and kind of what that signifies. But you see where he's in the North and it's a different world than what he's used to in the South on the surface. But when it really gets down to it, it's the same old. Other side of the coin, okay? This book deals heavily, same with this, with these people, Black people, being dispossessed in some kind of way. It's a heavy theme in this book and in Juneteenth. They're being dispossessed, displaced in some kind of way. You get to see this narrator. He didn't necessarily like spiral. I don't want to say spiral out of control, but he went through a few changes as life took its toll on him. He joined this brotherhood, which that was symbolic of something in itself, I believe. he became this like speaker. He was able to use what he thought was his gifts to do something. He was able to be seen when he wanted to be seen, but also become invisible and be able to see what he thought was a power, what he thought was power, how that may not have been power. He was able to see how black bodies and people are needed and used, but they're not valued as people. They're not seen for real. They just used in a way. And so you're able to see the mental toll that takes, the mental gymnastics that take. You're able to see trickery and discourse around that between the black characters and the white characters, and what people think they're doing versus what they're actually doing. And then you can kind of pan out from that. From Harlem is where we're talking about in New York, but you can kind of pan out from that and see how, yes, we're in Harlem and we're talking about Harlem, but this is a nationwide problem. This is a worldwide, global problem as well, in every community, in every nation. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when I was reading this. When I finished reading this book, I thought that the first half of the book was like easier to follow than the second half of the book. But after a few days, like after a week of finishing it, I don't necessarily think the first part where he was in a college setting was easier to follow. I just think if we're thinking about the like transition of that age group to like adulthood and what that looks like, some things, though they're more confusing and the character might seem more anxious and they might seem like less things matter, they're hyper focused on what we might think is not, like they're missing the bigger picture. And not just, I'm not talking junk about like college age kids, but I'm just saying like that transition from young adulthood to more like legit adulthood. It's a lot that goes on during that time. So I think that the reason, which I think is pretty clever how it's set up, because that time in his life where his entire life was at this university, and then he knew what that held. He knew the weight that held. He knew the hate that held. Barely. He knew it from his perspective, and he kind of acknowledged what was around that, because it wasn't all peaches and roses. He didn't really realize his part in this institution and system. He didn't see clearly what he was, because at that time he was not an invisible man. He didn't know he was an invisible man. Let me say that. He didn't know. And then he gets thrown in this parallel universe in Harlem where he gets to realize some stuff and come to understand what his place actually is in this world. And so I think that was a good representation of what people go through when they're at this young adulthood stage, and then they get thrust into like a world with no barriers, no boundaries, no borders, and you have to kind of figure that out and create it yourself. So I do think he did a good job in that. In this book too, there's a lot of like an idea of individualism versus community. Same in this book. I'm gonna get to it, but a lot of this kind of overlaps. You also see a couple similar like scenes almost, that they're not the same, but you can kind of see like, oh look, a little Easter egg. But anyways, a lot of ideas of the individual versus community. Like I said, he joined this collective, this brotherhood, and it was like, yes, he actually probably joined the brotherhood, but it was symbolic of a lot of stuff. It's a lot of symbolism in his book. It was symbolic of a lot of things, like a lot of philosophical things, I believe. Like I said, thinking and being about self versus foregoing yourself totally and doing what's best for the community and the people and the mission, and which one holds more weight, which one may be more damaging to you versus the community, and when to place one above the other, and what that looks like. What are you actually sacrificing and giving up when you do that? That was interesting. Another thing I really liked about this book, Invisible Man, and you know what? Everything I'm saying about this, low key, I can, like, now that I'm saying it, I can pretty much say the same thing about it, but there is freedom in not having to perform in this book, and you'll see it when I talk about the senator in this book. There is a sort of freedom, like I said, in not having to perform and being able to let down your guard, drop that veil, take off the mask, and literally just be. Like, there was a part of this book where the unnamed narrator was literally eating sweet potatoes, and he didn't have to walk around and be nervous and think about the stereotypes associated with it. There's another time where he's able to kind of like weave in and out by people mistaking him or thinking that he's another person, and the freedom and not having to like be perceived in a lot of ways, one thing, and being able, like I said, to just kind of, be, because he had been performing all his life in so many different ways, and you kind of see the freedom in, like I said, not having to perform and just being. This book and Juneteenth, okay, they both also deal with desire a lot, and giving into that versus not, because the flesh is tricky, man. Like, giving into that versus not, what that looks like, the consequences, natural consequences, enforced consequences. Yeah. In this book, I also was thinking a lot about what it means and what it feels like to find your place. What it feels like when you have to lie to yourself and almost trick yourself into believing that you're okay, or thinking that you're okay with being seen or invisible, with having a platform, with not necessarily knowing if what you're doing is aligning with what you think you're doing. And then even, y'all know how I feel. And this is like, yes, it's about this book, but it's also just about life. This made me think about just life in general. You know how I feel when you think like you're going along with something. And I'm hoping that nobody had to deal with this lately, but I feel like at some point in your life, a lot of people can relate to this, even if you were young, where you feel like you're doing one thing and then you take a step back after you really think about like the sequence of events and realize you were being like low-key manipulated. Like, you thought you was doing this, they let you think you were doing this, and you went all in with it. And other people might have been seeing that that's not what you're doing, that's not what this is, and you just could not see it at first. Hopefully nobody has went through this lately, but you just couldn't see because you're like, yes, this makes sense, I can do this, like, this is what it is. And then you take a step back after something is revoked, or after like something changes, or after you see something or get a revelation, conviction, whatever. You take a step back and you see like, if 1 + 1 is 2 and 2 + 2 is 4, and you see it, think like, this don't, what am I doing? That's what this book made me think of, that manipulation. And then this book makes me think about discipline and sacrifice and all of that. Like I said earlier, that brotherhood is symbolic. I even think the committee at the school is symbolic. Again, it's like a parallel universe. So you kind of see not exactly the same figures that you saw in the college scenes in Harlem, but you do see the same, like, people being the same, like, stand-ins. So they weren't necessarily like the same personality types, but you did have the same stand-ins kind of in both. Ones that kind of shocked the reader on both sides. Stories that kind of shaped the same type of story in the main character. Events that kind of happen in the first part of the book and the last part of the book, but they ignite something different in that unnamed narrator. And he plays a slightly different role in both situations, in the first half of the book and then the latter half when he's in Harlem. You get to see that too. You think about the college, like I said, was symbolic early on, but then you got like the hospital setting in Harlem, and that's symbolic later on too. And they both, where one is doing like a physical change, you got to think about how one changes you physically versus how it changes you psychologically and mentally, emotionally, and how those things are rarely separate. This was a good representation of that. Again, like, it's so much in here that you can grab onto and think about and talk about and just sit with. But then, while I'm saying all this, I remember that the reading experience itself wasn't something that, sometimes I read a book and I just know like the masses would, like, I would recommend this just out there. The masses would love this. And this is one I could literally see, like, I could see it being like a turn off for some people, just because I don't know if it's 100% his writing style. I think it's everything combined. It's the way that the story is told. You really gotta just like stick with it, in my opinion. And it is worth it in the end, but I could see how it's like, okay, like, what are you doing here? This is a lot. This is graphic. This is this. Like, this does not make sense. Does it even, like, why are we even talking about this? What happened to this? You kind of left us hanging over here. What's going on? I could see that. So, yeah. But when it come down to it, like, I like books where I can, where it causes me, like, okay, I'm about to take a slight detour. I was just recently asked to give a one-line sentence about the type of reader I am. And y'all, it took me all day to come up with a sentence because I truly was like, what type of reader am I? Like, and you got to see other people's, and they were like, oh, well, like, what type of books you like, what type of reader, something like that was the prompt. But you had to just quickly sum up to somebody asked. So people was like, I like to read Victorian style novels. I like to read 18th century works. I like to read this. I like to read post World War. I like to read post Cold War. I like to read this. I like to read that. I like to read modern works. I like to read absurdist works. And I was like, what do I like to read? This book helped me understand what I'm drawn to. And it's not necessarily the story, but I really do think that I really do think that I value like ideas and what a book is trying to do and like what it's trying to accomplish and make me think about more than I value the actual story. And this is a good example of that. This is a good example of that because he was doing a lot in his book behind the scenes that I really appreciated. But it was times where I was like, the actual story itself, and I'm glad I said that because that's really the reason why I kind of say I'm unsure that most people will like this, even though this is a highly acclaimed work. It's his most famous work. I just feel like a lot of people, like, I could see why people wouldn't want to read this. But anyways, I enjoyed what the book was doing. I really did. I got a lot from it, and I believe that because I read it now, I think that made a difference versus if I would have read it before now. I think this was a good time for me to read it, and not just my age, like, yeah, my age too, but also like a good time in my life. Like, I'm not just like what's going on in my life. I had time to be able to do a little more. I was a little more patient than I am come August. Okay, I was a little more patient than I am come December. And so I feel like this is a really good time to read this and pull it off the shelf because I didn't have to rush through it. I was able to like read it at whatever pace came, put it down when I wanted to put it down, and literally ask myself over and over, like, what is he trying to do with this? And then I'm like, oh, okay, I got time to like take a step back and look at that and appreciate it instead of just coming off being annoyed because I like, depending on my mind state, sometimes it can go that way. So yeah, that's Invisible Man. Who are you really? Same question that I got from reading Juneteenth. Who are you really? Who to be heard and not seen, to only be here to affirm what others want, to be agreeable. Both made me think about propaganda because I feel like that was relevant in both of these books. Both made me think about illusions, what meets the eye versus what's the reality behind the veil. Like I said, behind that curtain, what's the reality versus what meets the eye? And is it intentional deceiving or is it something else, And then, like I said before, infiltration. So, okay, that's Invisible Man for right now. Let me move on. I keep coming back and saying that's relevant here too. Well, let me just talk about Juneteenth real quick. Like I said, this book was a 40-year work in progress. Okay. It's evident. And I think Was this, where did I get that information? Hold on, let me not lie. Because it might have been, yes, it was an introduction. I didn't think I looked that up separately. But in the introduction, it's very evident that Ellison loved and appreciated history. He was a lover of it. He was a teacher of it. He was an appreciator of it. He was a respecter of it. And that's woven throughout Invisible Man and Juneteenth. This book, yes, it also highlighted those themes that I mentioned in Invisible Man, where it talks about identity, it talks about propaganda, like I said, illusion. This book also puts more of a spotlight on language, on leadership, like I mentioned before, definitely on illusion, on kinship. Kinship was evident in this too, but this one for sure. And also the American experience, specifically the Black male American experience. Okay, what's this book about? The two main characters in this book is Senator Bliss and Reverend Hickman. Hickman is a reverend, like I just said, and Bliss is a senator. He is very, very fair-skinned and passes for white, but he was raised by Reverend Hickman. Bliss was an orphan. He was taken in by Reverend Hickman, who he and pretty much everybody else called Daddy Hickman. And you don't know that at first when a book starts off, but it becomes evident and you get to see what their two, because they're both the main characters, but what their two roles mean in this book. Yes, they're actual characters, but it's also, like Invisible Man, it's symbolic of something else too. Very radical views, radical takes on Black manhood in America. What was interesting in this, which I kept thinking about, is the stark differences in Bliss and Reverend Hickman, but also even in their differences, how they're, you know how I mentioned in Invisible Man, this is like a parallel universe, the college and Harlem. This was like parallel leadership. But in Reverend Hickman and in Senator Bliss, they were like two sides of the same coin, but very different. They were very different, but they were so much the same. And it made me think about how politicians and religious leaders do have some similarities. Even if their values are different, their principles are different, it still is a certain type, it takes a certain type of charisma, a certain type of character, a certain type of person to be able to move a group of people emotionally. Same thing we see in here. It takes a certain person to be able to incite emotion in a large room of people and read that feedback and be able to adjust on the fly. Like how politicians, they'll be able to read the room, sense it, and quickly shift and be able to meet them where they at to get the response and recall that they're trying to get from them. It's the same thing and same skill and value, same skill that preachers do when they're in the pulpit. And you got this call and response going on. You're able to see where they at when they cold, warm them up. When they hot, take them to where they're supposed to be. Like, once you're there, now what's the action? And they both require very similar skill sets, even though they're rooted in different principles and values. And this was such a good representation of that. Such a good representation of that. Like, yeah, you get to see Senator Bliss was a trip. And I kept thinking to myself as I was reading it, like, now that I see, because you did get his backstory as a child, like I said, he was an orphan, but there was a lot of other stuff going on with that. You get to see, again, it's like, I feel like I keep reading books like this conversation and question of nature versus nurture, but you also get to see signs and little things that, like, I wonder if people who read this, would they have empathy towards Senator Bliss and the decisions that he was making and how he was talking about the people that raised him and like where he came from. Do you have any empathy towards him after you get his backstory? I thought about that. I thought about the fact that he was a child. Everybody was a child, but at the beginning, like when they had a flashback on Senator Bliss, you get to see the stuff that he had to, like, you get to see his mind working as a child to make sense of what's going on, because it's hard for kids to like grasp certain concepts, especially spiritual things. I'm not gonna say all the time, sometimes. And he did make a point in the book where like, yeah, you're not gonna get everything, but I even think there's like motives can be tricky with kids, and that's portrayed in here, and how that can manifest into something else in adulthood. You get to see that heavy. You get to see the irony woven throughout this book, just like I mentioned the irony in this book, the faith that the questions and the conversations and topics about faith, very interesting in here too. And this did also come across at times as disjointed as well, which made me think about, yes, this was published posthumously, but I also think low-key that's just Ellison's style. And maybe nobody else thinks that, just me. I can only speak from my reading experience. But it did at times seem on the surface as disjointed. But I feel like that's his style. And I don't think that it's like it doesn't, I don't think it's like I don't think it hurts him or hurts the book. I just think it takes a level of patience. That's what I'm gonna say, because it wasn't to the point where it's like, this is bad and I'm putting it down, but it was just like, I'm confused. Like, what's going on? And you just kind of gotta just let it take you on this ride. Just let it take you on this ride. And that's what happened with me with this book. Oh yeah, like I mentioned earlier, with the preachers and politicians leading a group, gearing them towards a certain emotion and response and action. That leading of a flock like that, it takes into play that perception versus reality I was talking about. Like, do you have, like, putting on that face to go in there and do what you got to do, and expelling that amount of energy, and then do you actually agree with that behind, like, is that who you actually are when the lights go off? What's your true motives? Is it what you're telling these people, or is it not? And why does that even matter? Heavy on what children can and can't make sense of, like concepts, gifts, also how children aren't protected. Even though this book, it is called Juneteenth, clearly, why I think it might have been named Juneteenth is some of the sermons in here that was preached by Bliss and Reverend Hickman, they embodied the spirit of Juneteenth in a lot of ways. They had that history woven into it about our people. They had that conversation going on about freedom, what that means, liberation, and how that's applied or not. They had that idea of rising up and making a change and a difference and teaching other people this and leading people a certain way. They had that idea of leadership and community moving towards a certain goal. Those sermons that was throughout here, that's what really embodied Juneteenth for me. So that recognition of what we lost and gained, recognition of what was stolen, and what freedom and emancipation really, really mean. Same questions could be asked about Invisible Man. The same questions that could be asked about Invisible Man. And it's a quote that's in Juneteenth that really applied to both of these. Let me read it. It says, sometimes the meaning of the word is in the way you make it sound. That can go with both of these books for real. It was in Juneteenth, but I can see that going with both of these. Oh, and lastly, this book made me think about motherless children because, like I said, Bliss was an orphan, and you got to see his yearning for a mom and everything that went along with that. So yeah, what I can say is I'm glad I read these together. I didn't initially plan to read Juneteenth directly after Invisible Man, but what happened was I was so intrigued by his writing style, and I couldn't determine if it was like in a good way or in a neutral way or in a bad way yet. I couldn't figure it out. So I said, let me just see if I can sense like some things, some patterns, what he's talking about, what he likes, what he's doing. Let me get more inside of like his world and see what this is about. And I do think I got a good idea of what he was trying to do. I'm sure I missed a ton of stuff, but like these both made me think about a lot of things, a lot of themes, a lot of situations. And I did appreciate it for what it was. Yeah, so I think that's it. That's it, y'all. Let me know if you've read Juneteenth. Let me know if you've read Invisible Man. Yeah, I think that's it. Let me put this one on top. Okay. All right, y'all. That's it. I know he has other works. Like I said, I will be like checking those out. This book was actually edited down so much to make Juneteenth. Like the manuscript was initially 3 volumes long, and the fact that they like chose this little piece to come out of it was interesting. I don't know, and I also feel like I'd be like conflicted about posthumously released work because like yes they wrote it, but I always wonder if the author would have been like, yes, this is complete or not. I still appreciate it for what it is, but yeah, I always think that when I read stuff that's been published after their death, even if I'm listening to music that's been published after, that's been released after somebody passed, I'm always like, would they sign off on this? Maybe they might, but they also might not. So are you getting like the complete story? Who knows? But that was interesting that there was initially 3 volumes, but they like put this together what he thought was the strongest, most cohesive piece. So yeah, that's it. Juneteenth and Invisible Man, y'all. Let me know if you read these, if you read other works by Ralph Ellison. I'd love to hear. And if you have read these, what do y'all think? What do you think about Ellison's writing? Let me know. Okay, let's see y'all on the next one.
Pages turning soft as silk, stories flowing like warm milk. A journey starts with every line, worlds unfolding in your mind. Bookmarks falling where dreams collide. Every cover's got a tale inside. Favorite reader, that's who you are. Traveling near, traveling far. Through every chapter